Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this short session for 30 minutes. Tim Baker's my name, and I'll be working with you in the next 30 minutes to talk about an interesting topic about how we might work on the business rather than in the business. And it's often a difficult concept because all of us are busy and all of us have got things to do. And, finding that time to make that continuous improvement that we need so desperately in our teams is not always an easy thing. So what I want to share with you during our short session is a concept that I know works extremely well. And it's a concept that doesn't take much time, and it gives you the opportunity to make some considerable improvements in your team. But not only that, it gives you the opportunity to be able to take the team with you. So in other words, the improvements are those sorts of improvements that people will actually adhere to on a regular basis. So I'll share my screen and we'll get underway. Okay, so as you can see, there's a copy of my latest book, Winning Teams, which will be out in the next week or so. But before we launch into talking about that, who am I? What have I got to offer in this whole area? So just a couple of things about myself. I'm obviously an author. I've written 10 books, and by the end of this year, I'll have my 10th book out. And so all my books, of course, are around leadership and building team harmony and really about boosting performance. I also do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of platform speaking. I do a lot of consulting with lots of organizations. In fact, I've worked in about 14 different countries and in 21 industries. So everything from not-for-profits right through to large enterprises, small enterprises, and also public sector. So I've had a considerable experience over 20 years. And as you can see up in the top right-hand corner, I'm also I still play in the Golden Oldies rugby competition here in Brisbane, which we only play every sort of fortnight because it takes about 2 weeks at my age to recover. So still doing that, but of course it's more of a social thing than anything else. So now, if you've got any questions or comments that you'd like to make throughout our presentation this morning, then please just go to the chat box and type them in. I'll see those messages, of course, and I'll respond to them as soon as possible. We simply don't have time to give 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this for a Q&A. So as soon as you think of something that you want to ask me, go ahead and type it in the question box, and of course, I'll respond to it immediately. All right, let's have a look. A couple of little quotes here from various people who, excuse me. Just a couple of quotes from significant people in the world of sport, and also the Queensland Police Commissioner, which I've done work for previously. And these are a couple of comments that they make about the book, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I've got a special offer for you as I go through those. Here's a quote from Nick Farr-Jones. Nick Farr-Jones, for those of you who may not be aware, is a former rugby union player for Australia, a Wallaby, and also a prominent business person who said that Tim's book nails the 8 characteristics of a high-performing team. These characteristics are about relationships and culture rather than the task at hand. So the focus very much of the book is around the people dimension of teamwork. And if you look at any high-performing team, you could say pretty clearly that one of the things that they do is obviously they have high task focus, of course, but they also work very hard on the relationship side of things as well. And that's pretty much what my book's working about, is the relationship side of things rather than the task. Now, and I said this at the outset, one of the objections that people have about perhaps how do we actually continuously improve our team when we're so time strapped, we've got to get the product or the service out the door. Now, how do we actually do that? And that's a big objection. It's not so much an objection, it's just a barrier that people have when they're trying to deal with this. So we'll look at how you might overcome that. 4 things we're trying to do during our time together is I want to talk about your debriefing options. And what I'm suggesting here is the debrief is your most powerful opportunity to improve the performance of your team. So what I mean, of course, by a debrief is at the end of a particular project or assignment or task, is working with your team at that point to debrief what went well, what didn't go well, and what are some of the things that we'll do differently as a result of that. I want to share with you a concept that's very prominent in the military, and in fact, it started in the United States military, which is called an after-action review, or an AAR, which is another term for that. And I want to just share that concept with you this morning and revisit it. You may well have heard of it. You may even use it. But I think sometimes we don't use it very effectively. And sometimes we use it as a quality control check, you know, a box ticking exercise, rather than a real opportunity of looking at change in our team. I'll also talk about some of the uses of the after action review and where it might be useful for you to use, so that at least when you walk away from here, you've got some sort of ideas perhaps about where you might apply an after action review. And at the end of this, I've got a special offer that I'd like to share with you as well. So that's essentially the key things that we'll cover in our short time together. Now, in my book, Winning Teams, I share this model, and really, I don't want to go through the whole model with you because I don't have time, but the book's pretty much based on the model. But you'll notice that around the outside edge, there are 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. And you'll notice that one of those characteristics that I've highlighted, of course, is improving teams. So we're going to actually look at that today. Of course, you can look at the other 7, and there are lots and lots of these different webinars that you can join, which are free. So I'd encourage you to do that. So what we'll really look at is this whole concept of improving teams today, because that's, if you show me any high-performing team anywhere in the world, whether it's in the sporting world, if it's in the arts, if it's in politics, business, wherever it might be, one of the things we do know for sure that all high-performing teams are always trying to improve their performance. They're always trying to look at better, faster, easier, safer ways of doing their business. And that's what we're going to cover today. And what I'm really going to talk about, of course, is the after-action review as your best opportunity to be able to do that in the minimum time that you have. So I do talk about the All Blacks in the book. And the All Blacks, if you're not sure, are probably the most successful sporting team in the world. They have about an 83% win rate. And you know, what you're seeing there in front of you is a picture of the All Blacks doing the haka, which is their dance at the beginning of their, before the whistle blows to play the game. But the All Blacks are a classic team who very much are into improving their own systems and the way they do things. And whilst I won't give many examples today, there's no doubt that they do use a lot of different strategies and techniques to improve their own performance. They're always looking, they're never satisfied with the status quo. They're always looking at new and better and faster ways of doing things. So let's talk about your options. Now, when you're debriefing, when you want to look at a systems review, there are a couple of things that you can look at. There are a couple of dimensions here. So for example, if you're involved in a project, you can review those projects at formative stages. So that is, of course, throughout the project. And if you look at the left-hand side there, you've got 2 different approaches. You've got regular dialogue and you've got check-ins. Now, you'll notice that regular dialogue on the right-hand side is an informal approach. Now, that's where you might well just informally, through like a corridor conversation, have a debrief about how things are going in the progress of the project. On the other hand, you might do that more formally, where you might have a regular check-in during the project. So this is just, and we normally have a work in progress meeting, as you know, and that's another opportunity. So you can do that. You can do that throughout the project, of course, and I'd encourage that, because when you do that throughout the project, the lessons learned can be applied for the rest of the project. So you're continuously improving all the way through the project. The other option, of course, is at the end of the project. That is when there's a finite stage of completion. An end of project debrief could be an informal get together where you get your team together and you just review what has actually happened. And of course, the other approach is at the end of the project, where you have to actually produce some sort of a report for the project. So basically what I'm saying is you've got 4 different options as to when you might debrief, if you like, during a project scenario. Now, the after action review is applicable in all 4 of those situations, and I'll refer to that as well as we go through. So there are your options. So summing up, it basically means that you should be debriefing throughout the project at different milestones in different places. But of course, at the end of the project, that's a perfect time then to review the whole project. So you've got those 2 options basically open, and you can do those both formally and informally, and the after action review can be done in both cases. So just before I launch into the after action review and what it is, let me just give a little bit of a testimonial, if you like, from Peter Senge. Now, Peter Senge is a guru in the whole area of workplace learning. And basically, he has this to say about the after action review. He says, the Army's after action review is arguably one of the most successful organizational learning methods yet devised. Yet most every organization effort to graft this truly innovative practice into their culture has failed, because again and again, people reduce the living practice of the after action review to a sterile technique. So he's basically saying it's got enormous potential, but it's not being used to its full potential. And of course, this comes from his book, The Dance of Change. So this is high praise indeed. And I just simply wanted to say that, because it's not just me suggesting to you that it's a great tool. It is actually a great tool because this is what the gurus are saying about it. So what actually is this after action review? What does it look like? Well, basically, I would suggest to you that these are the 3 key questions that you can ask either during a project or at the end of it that can make all the difference. So one of the first things about an after action review that it's important here is that these things are done in collaboration with your team. Now, the reason why that's very, very important is that when you get your team involved in the debrief or the systems improvement, which is what we're talking about, if you get your team involved, then they will own the improvement. They'll own the suggestion. And because of that, you're going to be in a position where they're going to, the improvement is going to stick because people are committed to that improvement. So these are the questions that you ask, and they're very, very simple questions. It's not as if you've got to read off a sheet or whatever. It's a very simple process. The first question that you would ask, and as I said, this could be happening during a project or at the end of a project. The first question you'd ask is, what systems, processes, and procedures are working well? Now you might say, well, why would we start with well? Well, regardless of whether the project is a success or is not a success, there is always something, in fact, several things that are going right. So there's always things that are working. And so let's start with the positive so that we create what I might call an upward spiral of positivity rather than a downward spiral of negativity. So what has actually worked well? And what you do is you throw that question open to your team, and you spend probably about 3 or 4 minutes just talking about the things that actually went well. So you might want to set some ground rules around this, that this isn't an opportunity to point fingers at anybody else or whatever. you're really just collecting a whole lot of information about what went well. And clearly there are things that have gone well if we look hard enough, regardless of how the project has actually gone. Now, it's a good idea, I might say, to list these things. So the idea would be to, if you've got a whiteboard or butcher's paper or something like this, I'd write those things down just to affirm the responses that you're getting back from your team. Once you've exhausted that, you move on to the next question. And the next question is, what systems, processes, and procedures are not working well? And you'll notice the emphasis here is on systems, processes, and procedures. So we're really talking about the way things are being done. And you open that up for discussion, and you have a listen to what your team's got to say around that whole notion of what hasn't worked well. And again, this is not a case of pointing fingers of blame or anything like that. It's really an opportunity for people to share what they saw, what they observed, what they used. And of course, you listen to what people have got to say. And as I said, you can again write that up on the whiteboard in front of you, and that affirms people's responses. So at this stage, we've done two important things in the after action review. We've looked at the things that are working extremely well, and we've looked at the things that are not working well. So we've actually created a little bit of a gap between what's worked well and what hasn't worked well. Now, by doing that, of course, the third question is a lot easier to ask and answer as well. So you might say, well, how long would I need to spend on those questions? I would suggest to you, you could probably get away with 4 or 5 minutes at most on those questions. Now, the third question is where the rubber meets the road. And that question is, what improvements or changes can we make for the future? Now, so what you're doing is you're opening up a conversation with your team members while it's fresh in people's mind. And bear in mind, you can do this through the project or at the end, but while it's fresh in people's mind, you can say, okay, what improvements or changes can we make? And because you've asked those first two questions, it's a lot easier to launch into that. You can imagine what it'd be like if you sat down with your team and said, what improvements or changes can we make to this project? It's a little bit difficult, and you probably find that people will probably sit there and say nothing at that point. But by asking those first two questions, it leads nicely into that third question. So we've primed the pump, so to speak, and given people an opportunity to come up with their suggestions for the future. And you listen to those. You could have some discussion on those things. Some of those will be fairly obvious, things that perhaps could be done more effectively are fairly obvious, and there are perhaps other things that might be open for a bit more discussion. And then again, you get your whiteboard and you record those things as well with all your team participating in that process. So you may end up with a list of maybe 2 or 3 things that can be improved for next time round. And the whole purpose of that is that you can then start to implement those improvements the next time round you've got a similar sort of project. Now, the magic of the after action review is not so much just that you've unearthed these things, it's that you've got your whole team engaged in the process of continuous improvement. That is essentially the key message here. And so everyone's participating in that. Of course, some people will say more than others and all the rest of it, but I wouldn't be afraid to actually say to people, well, Jim, you haven't said anything. Is there anything you would like to add to what's already been said? So you can certainly, if you're quieter ones, you can certainly get them more involved in the after action review as well. And then when you've made a list of these things, then you've got your improvements for the future. And you'll find that people will be committed to that. Now, there might just be a little bit of work for you at the end of this to make sure that those things can, in fact, be implemented. And maybe there's some arrangements that you need to make in order to get those things implemented. But ultimately, that's the process. And really, what I'm suggesting here is we're talking 15 to 20 minutes at the end or even during a project. And those, if you get yourself used to doing that, then people get used to this whole concept of an after action review. And it's a small investment of time for a massive return, because you're actually engaging people. while things are fresh in their mind and while they're ready to talk about those things. So let me give you some examples of clients that I've worked with who have used the after action review to great effect. But just before I do that, when could you use this? Well, you can use it when a new set of procedures has been implemented. So, you've put in a new system in your workplace, a new software, or something that has been put into your team that's relatively new. And perhaps at some point when you think it's appropriate, you can then do an after action review to find out what's working well, what's not working well, and what can we do differently as a result of what we've discussed. It could be after a busy period when capacities stretch. So this might be where people are really chasing their tails and things are being a little bit out of kilter. And at the end of that, you can actually get your team together and say, okay, we've had a busy period. During this busy period, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and what will we do differently? So you sort of down tools and take a little bit of a deep breath and actually look at how you can do things differently. It could be done following a trial period on a new system. So you've given this a pilot, and this has gone on for a period of, say, several weeks. And at the end of that time, you can actually sit down with your team and go through and talk about what's actually worked well. After a major training activity, for example, where people have actually attended a training program, maybe at the end of that, it'd be a perfect opportunity to ask people again what went well, what didn't go well, and what can we implement as a result of what we've done. And even between shifts, so in a production environment, a manufacturing environment, between shifts, you can actually get both the people that are finishing the shift and the people who are coming into the shift, that's the next group. Just in that transition point, you can actually ask people what went well, what didn't go well, and what do we need to be aware of in the new shift when we start in a couple of minutes' time. So there's plenty of opportunity and plenty of scope to use it. It just requires you as a leader to be aware of those opportunities and to seize the moment to use the after action review in those points. So what does work extremely well. Now, I can give you a couple of examples of where it's worked extremely well in my own line of work, not so much my own line of work. I have done a lot of work with police, and I've had a long association with the police, and not that sort of association. And with police, one of the detectives that I spoke to recently in a jurisdiction I was working in told me that she has an after-action review at the end when her team goes in to investigate a murder. So during this time, of course, you might have 4 or 5 detectives. They go into a house, they survey the house, they take some photographs, they take some fingerprints. They perhaps talk to people that might be closely associated or perhaps on the periphery of the murder. And what they're trying to do, of course, is solve a crime, essentially, is what they're doing, and investigate a crime. But what she told me is that at the end of this, she walks out, and once everyone's come away from the scene, and this could be at 2 o'clock in the morning, it could be a very strange sort of time. And then while everyone's outside in the street, before they're ready to drive home and get some rest after, no doubt, a stressful situation, she will use that opportunity just for that 10 to 15 minutes to ask these 3 questions. And she'll ask people, well, in this murder investigation, what did we do well? And, she'll get that feedback, and people remember us standing out on the street at this point. So it's done very much in an informal way. She'll then ask what didn't go so well. And so there's a review of some of the things that perhaps didn't go as well as they could in this investigation. And then the last question she says is, for the next investigation that we've got, what perhaps should we do differently? And people will involve themselves, according to her, in those conversations before they drive off to go home for the evening or the morning or whenever it might be. So that's a great example where it works really well. I'm also working in an IT firm in Brisbane who use the after action review on a very regular basis. So they do a client project, and once the client project's finished, and there might be several people involved, they will basically sit in an office or in a room, and they'll go through those 3 questions that I've mentioned to you. So essentially what they're trying to do is to glean the wisdom, the bits of wisdom that might be useful for the next project that will be similar for the next client. So it can be worked in that environment as well. And of course, I've also done this in government, and in government, perhaps this can be done more formally. So for example, there's a major project in the community, and one council I did this with, the councillors would get together and the mayor would basically ask 3 key questions: what went well, what didn't go well, and what did we learn from this for the next time we've got to implement this change. So that would be an example where you could use that in a more formal sense. So I think those 3 examples give you a sense of when you can use it. And I think really it's just a matter of remembering and seizing the moment at the end or even during a project where you can actually debrief with your team. You'll find that it's well worth the time. You'll get tremendous return on investment. It won't take you much time to do. And you'll find that the learnings are rich and useful and practical and can be used in a similar circumstance in the future. So folks, that's pretty much the after action review. So I'd recommend you give that a go. Just a couple of things before I finish up today. And I'm just checking to see if we've got any, nothing at the moment. So if you've got a comment to make, by all means. Now, next Friday, every single Friday, I have a 30-minute free webinar, just as we've done today, based on my latest book. And this, of course, is in my latest book. Next Friday, and you're more than welcome, because you've got the link on your screen, you're more than welcome to join me next Friday at 11:30, when we're going to look at the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. So I'll share those characteristics with you very briefly and give you an opportunity perhaps to measure your own team against those 8 characteristics. So you're more than welcome to attend. You'll get a copy of these slides and I'll send them out to you for registering. Thank you. And of course, all you've got to do is click on the link and it'll take you into the registration as you've done for today. So that's a quick plug. And of course, there's other ones that you might be interested in as well. Now, as I said to you, my book's out very soon, and it's normally valued at $40. That's what it'll be sold for. But a little incentive for you: if you send me an email by the close of business today, I will give you an opportunity to purchase the book for $30 plus postage. So, you know, that's a significant difference, and you're more than welcome to take advantage of that opportunity because you've taken the time out to listen to me today. So, but I'd also say to you that I'll give you another special offer. If you're willing to send me your email, send me your address today, send me your details, I will also send you a link to an online course, which I value at about $675. And this is a program where you can start working on your team before you get a copy of the book, so that this will give you an opportunity to do a free online course, which will talk about the after action review and all the other concepts that I talk about in the book. So all you've got to do to take advantage of that offer is simply send me an email, and I will be happy to direct you to the website where you can purchase the book, and you'll also get a link to the course. So that's pretty much it from me. So folks, we don't have too many questions, but that's pretty much it from me. I hope you found that useful. I would strongly urge you to use your after action review and to use it on a more regular basis than perhaps we all know about these things, but it's all the key is always to use them. Is to find the time. It might seem a bit strange at the beginning to use an after action review, but I can guarantee to you your team will respond very well to it, and you'll find that the time that you spend debriefing you'll get back manyfold, because there'll be a lot of changes that people will offer because it's fresh in their mind. And not only that, everyone will be committed to the change because they have been involved in it. And as the old saying goes, people don't argue with their own data. So that's it from me. Thank you, everyone. And stay tuned and watch your inbox, because you'll be getting an email from me very, very soon. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day and have a great weekend. And hopefully we'll catch you next Friday. Thanks, everyone. All the best and goodbye.